Smoppy for life, yeah. Smoppy for life. Stand up when the chief is here. Hands up, yeah, the chief is here. Stand up when the chief is here. Hands up, yeah, the chief is here. Yeah, Smoppy for life.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to a Monday webinar with the most extraordinary man, Moeletsi Mbeki. And Moeletsi Mbeki has a rather extraordinary last name, as we all know, but that's not because it's an extraordinary last name, it's because he's an extraordinary man. He's a political analyst, he's an author, he's an entrepreneur, he's chairman of a number of companies, and he's produced some extraordinary books, the most recent one being How to Save South Africa, and we're going to talk about that today. He's also involved in universities and has scholarships to his name of the most extraordinary amount. After returning to South Africa from exile in about 1990, he was appointed head of communications for COSATU and media consultant to the ANC. So he really does know the ANC, not from birth, but from the beginning of its control of South African politics. He's also spent a lot of time in Zimbabwe and was a senior journalist in the 80s for Zimbabwe newspapers in Harare. And impressively, a scholarship man he is indeed. I've just missed that. Which scholarship did you get, Moeletsi? Oh, you got a Nieman Fellowship at Harvard. And as you know, I went to Harvard, but I didn't get any scholarships. So Moeletsi, welcome to our webinar. I'm so proud to have you here. The opening question to you is, are we going to survive? Should we pack our bags? Should we get our rowboats ready to leave? Are we falling off a cliff? Or is there salvation?
Well, we are going to survive. Countries will always survive, even if the people find it very hard to survive, but the country itself survives. South Africa, of course, is an old country, so it has seen a lot of history. If you look at the history book, modern South Africa is about 360 something years old if we start with the arrival of the Dutch East India Company in South Africa. So South Africa has seen a lot of trials and tribulations, and the South Africans have been through a lot of trials and tribulations. And my own view, I'm always optimistic that we will solve the problem. So far, we have solved them, and so far we have avoided a scenario like we see in Syria in the Middle East. So hopefully we'll continue to avoid those kinds of scenarios. But of course, you can't avoid them forever if you don't really sort out your problems. So because Syria, after all, was a 5,000-year-old country, but it was destroyed in the last few years. It had survived for thousands of years, but today it's virtually no longer there. So it can happen to anyone.
So Trevor Manuel, and I'm going to misquote him, I apologize, I will misquote him, but he said something like, the last 26 years have been wasted. And a lot of opportunities have been missed to do the right thing. A lot of things have been done wrong, but a lot of things have been done right. Where do you stand on the balance of 26 years?
Well, I was surprised to hear that from Trevor, since he was such a central player in those 26 years, first in the negotiation of the Constitution, then secondly as a minister in trade and industry, in finance, writing the National Development Plan. So I was surprised he said so. So no, I don't think he's right. I think there were certain things that were done right. There were some that could have been better, and there were some that were done wrongly. So I would rather take the middle road than to say we wasted the last 26 years.
But did it all go wrong when President Zuma came on board, or had the slow puncture begun before? What's your view?
Well, I don't think it went wrong when Zuma came on board. There were a number of mistakes that were made by the ANC leadership and within the ANC, and that opened up opportunities for the international pirates. You know, we forget that in the real world there are real pirates out there, and if you show weakness, they're gonna take you apart. So South Africa is a very attractive country. It has a huge world reputation. So both the good guys and the bad guys have their eyes on South Africa. They are seeing they are watching what's going on in South Africa. And in the case of these Indian brothers, the Gupta brothers, they were the bad guys, and you know, they did a good job on us. Remember, the ANC as a government are still novices, so they are easy to take apart by people who are experienced in the business of government.
You know, it feels like every 10 years there's a crisis. A lot of people leave. A lot of people are despondent. We recover. We grow. But maybe there's an inevitability today about the economy. Let's not talk politics yet, but the economy is not in good shape. And the ANC have not mentioned economic growth, those two magic words, in a long time. It's redistribution, transformation. Where's economic growth come in?
Well, that is never, the ANC has never understood what economic growth is. They can write it, but I think that's about as far as it goes. What it entails, no, I don't think the ANC has given much thought to that issue. Remember, the ANC is a nationalist movement, and nationalist movements are about redistribution and consumption. The previous nationalist to the ANC was the National Party. They were also about consumption and redistribution. They were only lucky that when they were in power, the minerals of South Africa were still plentiful and easily accessible and so on. They are becoming less plentiful and more difficult. So, but nationalist parties are not about growth because they are driven by grievance. You see, that's what nationalists are about. They are aggrieved about somebody. So their focus is, how do I address my grievance? And usually it's by consumption. You consume and you say, I want to consume as much as the guy who I'm aggrieved against. So the Afrikaner nationalists said they must consume and be like the British industrialists, and now the African nationalists, which is the ANC, is saying, oh, we must be like the white middle class. We must consume like the white middle class in South Africa. So that's how nationalism works. So what things like growth, no, they don't feature in their vocabulary.
But that's very worrying, because if, you know, it's that sort of two analogies. The one is the slow puncture. You know, if you're riding on a bicycle, you know you've got a puncture, you don't fix it because you think you can keep getting to the next destination and the next destination. Once the puncture, you can't travel anymore. We've definitely had a slow puncture for a while. So it's very worrying. And you know, I often think, why does anyone study political science at university? That's the last thing we need. We need engineers and accountants and nurses and doctors and business people and entrepreneurs like you.
We have them. That's one of the strengths of South Africa. Not as much as we should, but we have all those. But the challenge we have is the environment, the business environment, to make these people, to incentivize these people to work harder, to work longer hours, to produce more, to be more creative. That's what's missing, is that. So this is what that South Africa and all of us South Africans have to address, the issues that disincentivize the creative people that we have in this country. And there are lots of those in the political space that disincentivize these creative, productive people.
So let's say that there were some things going right, some things going wrong. We were muddling forward, and then the Guptas got hold of the Zuma presidency and put people in place that they could co-opt, coerce, make things happen, steal. Then the tenderpreneurs came in and the handouts, and it's all started to go against the creative, dynamic people that are trying to build businesses. Then we got hit by COVID, which has obviously damaged the economy. But the thing that worries me maybe the most, the sort of heaviest rock on the pile, is corruption. And Mohammed Durat has put up a question, which I think is a good one to ask now. Can the ANC rid itself of corruption, or has the cancer become terminal? Has it become endemic? Is it curable?
Well, I lived in Zimbabwe. I lived in Tanzania, in Kenya. I did some work in Nigeria. So what always amuses me is what is called corruption in South Africa. It's a really small change in the bigger scheme of what goes on in other African countries. And secondly, South Africa, most importantly, has a constitution and a judiciary that both frowns on corruption. And the fact that it frowns on corruption means that it makes corruption costly to those who want to embark on that line of business. So we have a lot of countervailing strands against corruption in South Africa. We all have to demand that they be activated, and I think they are being activated. They never were not there. They were there even at the height of the corruption era, so to speak, the state capture, as Thuli Madonsela called it. They were there, and they were still opposing corruption. Remember, it was the Constitutional Court that told Parliament, which had been turning a blind eye to Zuma building himself a palace called Nkandla. It was the Constitutional Court that said that the recommendations of the public protector have to be implemented. And that's what brought this whole thing apart. That's what led to the Zondo Commission. That's what led to the new appointment of the Director of Public Prosecutions. So we still have the will, the disapproval to deal with corruption. Now, can the ANC within its ranks deal with corruption? Well, I have my doubts. The ANC has its own internal divisions. In fact, the ANC is paralyzed rather than pro anything. It is paralyzed, so it finds itself very unable to act on many things that it should act on. However, the ANC and the state of South Africa are two completely different things. The state has the institutions like the judiciary, which can act and are acting. Again, the Constitutional Court, the ANC has been blocking the ability of independent citizens to stand for parliament, both at the provincial and at the national level. But the Constitutional Court has now ruled that actually it is a constitutional right of South African citizens to be able to stand as individuals, not it doesn't make the party, the political party, the only way in which you can get into parliament. So that's why myself, I'm yes, corruption is bad, but I can tell you, I think South Africa has got a lot of strength to deal with the corruption. Of course, it falls. I mean, there are guys who always get away with murder. There's always a guy who gets away with thieving, but that's life.
So there were two paths now in the conversation, but if you don't mind, I'm going to just address the issue of the pillars of democracy. And I lived overseas for 31 years, and 3.5 years ago, came back with my New Zealand wife, our 2 little children. My older children stayed abroad. And I said to my wife, with Zuma in charge and state capture, the country's got 4 years left. So let's go and have a great time. I'll show you my life growing up. It's the most beautiful country. We've got 4 years left. And she said, why 4 years? And I said, because all the state-owned enterprises have been corrupted or compromised, and all the pillars of democracy have, except for finance, judiciary, finance, treasury, judiciary, and media. And as we got back, the finance ministers got changed, the whole thing happened, and then he was trying to get hold of treasury. And I said, wow, this is not good because, and this is my theory, it takes 6 years to compromise the judiciary because you've got to change 1,000 judges, and that takes 6 years. I reckon they were 2 years in. Or you act like Erdogan did. He gets elected in Turkey, and within a week, 9,000 judges are replaced. Then you control the judiciary. And the media, you can just turn off overnight. And then Cyril Ramaphosa got elected. My wife said, what does that mean? And I said, I think we've just kicked the can down the road. So sorry about a monologue there, but do you think the judiciary has been compromised, or do you think it's such a powerful pillar of democracy, we're okay?
No, I don't think the judiciary has been compromised at all. I think it's very, very intact. It's got a lot of credibility with the population, with the citizens of South Africa, and that is its strength. It's credible to the people. And as I've just pointed out, it has pointed out that the ANC has been acting unconstitutionally in the last 20 years. In not opening up individuals to be able to stand for National Assembly and provincial parliament. And it gave the government 24 months in which to implement it. And I can assure you 24 months from when the decision was taken, the government will have to table a proposal to the Constitutional Court saying, this is how we intend to implement the decision that you ruled on. So I'm not pessimistic myself about the strengths of South Africa. I'm quite optimistic. Of course, you have to work at it. You have to make sure that people don't get too despondent because these things take a long time. But for example, one of the things the business community in South Africa has come up with its own proposal of an inclusive economy. Now, how many business organizations in the Western world come up with policies that call for an inclusive economy? Very few. But the business community in South Africa realizes that we have to address the unemployment, we have to address the low business confidence, the low investment in the economy, and that these issues have, and they are willing to come out and say what they are. That is the difference with many countries. They are willing to say to the government, these are the obstacles that you, as the government of South Africa, are putting in the way of growth, of economic growth, and of prosperity and employment creation in the country. So those are, to me, are positives that we have to work with and develop.
So let's go back to where you were heading. Fortunately, I've managed my brain to get back to that crossroad. Somebody asks a question which is relevant to this. His name's Crimson Pill. So I think red pill, blue pill. I don't know what Crimson Pill is. He says there's a foundational issue within the ANC. Its ideology is flawed at its core, and Zuma is merely a visible symptom of the greater issue, which is not quite what you said. I think you said it's a nationalist organization, and maybe it's run its course. Maybe it's broken inside and it needs to split into whatever you want to call it, and NewCo. And NewCo would be Cyril Ramaphosa, Pravin Gordhan, Tito, Patricia de Lille, Zweli, I would think. Do you think that'll happen? Is there a crack happening? Is Ramaphosa playing his cards now for the good guys, let's say?
Well, nationalist parties have a limited lifespan, if I can say so. If you look at the surviving parties in the world, they are not nationalist parties. The Republican Party in the United States, that's a long surviving party. They were the ones who led the Civil War against the South, and who Abraham Lincoln, people forget, he was a Republican. Okay, not of the Donald Trump variety, but he was a leader of the Republican Party. And we all know about the work that he did. Now, the nationalist parties like the National Party in South Africa, the ANC in South Africa, United National Independence Party in Zambia, ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe, their story, their anchor ideology, which is grievance, runs out of steam. They have to come up with a new message and a new vision. And this is what has happened to many parties throughout Africa and Asia. Look at the Indian Congress Party in India, which was, the party of Mahatma Gandhi. So those are the dynamics. So the ANC is faced with the same problem. The ANC is steadily unable to come up with a new vision for South Africa. And it will get replaced sooner or later. It may take more or less time, but the message of grievance against white people, grievance against the National Party, against the British, against the Dutch East India Company. After a while, people say, hey, we've had all that now, where do we go to from here?
But the worrying thing is, in its death throes, or as it breaks up, it can do a lot of damage to the constitution, the economy, people's view of each other. That's my worry.
Well, I think the one good lesson we learned from the time of Zuma's administration is how it can be done. So we are wiser about how this kind of damage can be done. And so we know a little more better how we can control it. Yes, I agree with you completely that it causes, look at the damage ZANU-PF has caused to Zimbabwe. I lived in Zimbabwe, I was a journalist there, and one of my assignments was reporting on changes in agriculture when I was working for the Features Department. And peasant agriculture in Zimbabwe in the 80s was flying. New black commercial farmers were flying. Mugabe destroyed all of that. So we are a step ahead, because at least we have the lessons of Zimbabwe to learn from, so that
as long as we learn them.
No, so that we don't allow what happened in Zimbabwe to happen in South Africa.
Do you think that South Africa is more West-leaning or East-leaning in its policies, economics, foreign diplomacy, or are we playing the game of all against each other, which would be nice?
No, South Africa is very much a West-leaning country because remember, South Africa is a democracy, and its democracy was the demand of the people. It was not imposed on South Africans. They demanded it. South Africa has a capitalist economy, and South Africans want the capitalist economy to perform equitably, but they are not against the capitalist economy. South Africa is a majority Christian country, so you have a predominantly, and of course, its elite is an English-speaking elite. So South Africa is a West-leaning country. There are a few people who say we must be like China, but most of those people have no clue what goes on in China, how the Muslims are treated in China, and so on.
So you've been quite a vocal critic of Ramaphosa's inaction, and it's very interesting. I won't say who it is, but I was up at the Dunhill Golf with the ex-chairman of 2 SOEs, wears a hat, great friend of mine. And I walked down into Jabu Mabuza. And I walked down into the lobby and he was really looking frustrated. He was standing on his own. I said, Jabu, what's wrong? Was it golf? He said, no, Cyril is just not taking action. This was previous October. And the sort of inaction element has stuck with him. And you've been a very vocal critic. Do you think he's getting into action now?
No, I think we have to be fair to Cyril. The reality is that the internal fractures in the ANC paralyze the ANC. So even if the great Mandela himself were the leader of the ANC today, he would be faced with a paralyzed organization. And so he would find it very difficult to act. So Cyril, however, is no Nelson Mandela. He hasn't got strong belief. He hasn't got a strong vision for what South Africa should be, and so on. So he has his own weaknesses as a leader, and he thinks issues get solved by negotiation. Well, most issues are better solved by negotiation, but some you have to, as a leader, you have to decide. I mean, Mandela decided to open the negotiations with Kobe Kutsie, for example, and a lot of the ANC, when it found out, first he decided on his own and he got on with it, and then many of the ANC leaders were up in arms when they found out what he had done. But if he hadn't done it, where would South Africa be today? Cyril couldn't take that kind of a decision. But then many people couldn't. Mandela was a unique man, so you can't compare ordinary mortals to him.
So a friend of yours, Audrey Ranga, says, I bought your book, Architects of Poverty, a few years ago. You argued that Africa needed a bourgeois revolution like that in China. What did you mean? And is that still your view?
Yeah, you see, we had a mining revolution in South Africa. We didn't have an industrial revolution. We had a mining revolution. And the character of that mining revolution, it could carry quite a lot of infrastructure development. It could carry quite a lot of development, which is the level of development that we see today in South Africa. That's what the mining revolution did. We now need a real industrial revolution, because to absorb the 40 or 50% of our population, that is not working. you need an industrial revolution. And who is going to achieve an industrial revolution? It's the same old bourgeoisie that Karl Marx talked about, I don't know, 200 years ago. He pointed out that that's who was changing the world, was the bourgeoisie and the capitalists. So we need more capitalists and more entrepreneurs in South Africa to be able to absorb the 50% of our economically active population that is not working at the moment. I mean, if you go up to the Highveld, if you drive through the Highveld in South Africa, the state of infrastructure for our agricultural sector is absolutely appalling. It's totally appalling. If you go through the roads in the Free State, for example, they're in a very shocking condition. And then if you look at the farms themselves, the fences are falling down and all sorts of things. So these are enterprises that should be thriving and creating jobs and employing more people and driving the society forward. But they are not doing so.
Our friend, before I get onto that question, we've got a question from guest 1362. Okay. Mr. Mbeki, I know you reject BEE, but what are your thoughts on affirmative action generally? Does it work? Should we keep it?
Well, you know, this is a debate that never seems to end in South Africa. I noticed the DA policy conference wasted its time talking about whether race exists or it doesn't exist. You know, it's like, how many angels can dance on the head of a pin? That's kind of the level at where we are at. South Africa's problem is our underperforming economy. And to make our economy perform and to uplift the living standard of all South Africans, we have to use the tools that the British used, that they invented with their Industrial Revolution. The Americans copied it, the Germans copied it, the Chinese are now copying it. We have to do the same thing. Now, those who want to argue about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, well, of course, we're a democracy. They are free to argue about that. Affirmative action, you cannot have affirmative action for majorities. Affirmative action only works for minorities. It worked for the Afrikaners. It is working to some extent for the African Americans. But majority, you can't have affirmative for majorities. The blacks in South Africa are a majority. You can't have affirmative action for them. They have to build the country. They have to make the sacrifices to build the country. So that is the reality. So we can go round and round in circles about whether race matters, race doesn't matter. It's a waste of time.
Let the entrepreneurs loose, let them free, bring the human capital out.
Absolutely. That's what we need to do in South Africa. We have to create an environment and a support system where these entrepreneurs, whatever their race or their color or their gender, well, they develop the country. They build enterprises, world-class enterprises. We have some, but not enough. So, I mean, our banks are considered to be world-class by any standard, which shows that South Africa can build world-class enterprises. Well, let's focus on building world-class enterprises.
I love that. Our dear friend Musi Maimani, who's building a grassroots organization called 1SA and is traversing the country. He really has gone down to the grassroots and is doing an amazing job. In addition to providing food and sanitizers, I must applaud him. He asks the question, do you believe the party system can be defeated without electoral reform?
Well, we do have electoral reform already. As I pointed out, what the Constitutional Court decided is the electoral reform, which had been agreed upon, ironically, in the constitutional negotiations in the early 90s. It had been agreed that we will use the proportional representation system because with the fragmentation of the country that the apartheid regime had created, we did not have a national census, which meant that we couldn't have a constituency system. So we had to have a closed proportional representation system in order to run the first or the second election. But after that, it was agreed that a combination of constituency and proportional representation must be explored and implemented. And a commission was actually established by the South African government, which was headed by Frederick van Zyl-Slabbert, to look at how to do it. But the ANC uses majorities to can that report. It has now come back in the form of a ruling by the Constitutional Court. So we're moving forward. There is an electoral reform has already been implemented by the Constitutional. The thing is, it has instructed Parliament to now make it a reality. But the legal standing of it is now done. So Parliament has to find a solution. How do they make, to the satisfaction of the Constitution, how do they implement this? So I agree, we need electoral reform, but we are in the process of an electoral reform.
I want to talk about your books because you've really done some deep thinking and some innovative thinking. What's your new book going to be about?
Well, as I said before we went live, I think now is the time for us in South Africa to act. We have lots of writers, including myself. I'm a partner in a publishing company. We recently published a fantastic book by the head of economics department at the University of the Free State called Getting It Right. So we have our South Africans are finding solutions and are writing about these solutions. And so, but for me, I think we have to now put a bit more of our energy on implementing. We've done the writing. Yes, it has to be improved, but let's start by the implementation of what needs to be done to address the problems that we're sitting with. Because if we don't address them, they'll blow up, and then we will end up like Syria. So I mean, that's the reality.
What I love about your books is you do give prescriptions, you give suggestions. You're very, you do say this is what we ought to be doing. Do you ever wish you could go back to your books and change something that you've written or do an updated version?
Well, I was asked, actually, I wrote Architects of Poverty. It was published in 2009. And last week, there was a conference on Europe and Africa in Lisbon. And so I was asked to be interviewed by one of their senior journalists about what I wrote in Architects of Poverty. Now, I had completely forgotten most of what I had said. So I had to reread the book myself. And I was quite surprised that it sounded like good solutions in it. Of course, there's room for improvement, but
so let's,
on the whole, I think.
Now, it's very easy to be pessimistic about South Africa, particularly if you live here. And having come back to South Africa 3.5 years ago, I said to my wife, if you want to live in paradise, don't read the newspapers or look at the news, and you live in a bubble. But we came back to make a difference and to help people and to do what we can, because no one can fire me, as far as I can tell, except my wife. Give us the optimistic view. Give us the hope. Tell us the good news.
Well, there is lots of good news in South Africa. As I pointed out, the business community in South Africa has come up in the past few weeks, 3 or 4 weeks, has come up with a strategy of where we should be going to. And I think every South African who wants to make a difference should read that strategy, because these are the people who produce the egg and bacon that we eat every morning. So they know what they're talking about. So that's a huge achievement, the fact that they now put their thoughts together and are saying, and have presented to the government, and have presented it also to the trade unions and said, the trade unions, you also, this is the proposal, you come up with your own, or let's sit down together and discuss the way forward. So for me, that is hugely optimistic. 2 weeks ago, the Standard Bank came up with a report. They did a survey of the thoughts, and so on, of the high net worth individuals in 5 English-speaking countries: South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, Mauritius, and Ghana. So here is a bank, I mean, its job is to make money, but it realizes that high net worth individuals in Africa are a critical source for development of the continent. So it invests what is actually a lot of money in finding out what are the anxieties of these people, how should they be addressed, how should they be encouraged to invest more, because obviously they are clever people. To be a millionaire, not every one of us can be a millionaire.
I think you're talking about me, are you?
So these are all the processes that are going on in South Africa, and to me, I think they give us a lot of optimism.
Well, Moeletsi, it gives me a lot of hope and optimism to have someone as extraordinary as you in this country, devoted to change, making an effort. I really want to thank you for what you're doing. You're a voice of reason. You're an extraordinary man. And as we end, I'm just going to ask you, I know you've got a son and a grandson in London, but I'm going to ask you just a very important question. If you had to sing or if you had to dance, which one would you choose?
I think I would sing.
I would sing too. Moeletsi, I really look forward to meeting you in person. I cannot thank you enough, and keep up the fantastic work. We're big fans of yours, and everyone should buy your books immediately. Thank you, and see you soon.
Thanks for having me. Okay.
All the best.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.